Toot Toot felt that 4 cents was far too little for a prime Corona cigar box. And in that he was probably right. Cigar boxes were highly prized objects in prison. 1,000 different small items could be stored in them, and the smell was pleasant. There was something about them that reminded our customers of what it was like to be free men. Because cigarettes were permitted in prisons, but cigars were not, I imagine. Dean Stanton, who was back on the block by them, added a penny to the pot, and I kicked one in his wall. When Toot still proved reluctant, Brutal went on to work on him, first telling him that he ought to be ashamed of himself for behaving like such a cheapskate, then promising him that he, Brutus Hall, would personally put the Corona box back in Toot's hands the day after De La Croix's execution. 6 cents might or might not be enough if speaking about selling the cigar box, but we could have a good old barbershop argument about that, Brutal said. But you have to admit, it's a great price for renting one. He's going to walk the mile in a month, 6 weeks at the very outside, while that box will be back on the shelf under your cart almost before you know it's gone. He could get a soft-hearted judge to give him a stay, and I'll be here to sing "Should Old Acquaintances Be Forgot." Toot said, but he knew better, and Brutal knew he did. Old Toot had been pushing that damn Bible-quoting cart around his whole mountain since the Pony Express days, practically, and he had plenty of sources. Better than ours, I thought then. He knew De La Croix was fresh out of soft-hearted judges. All he had to do was left hope was with the governor, who as a rule didn't issue clemency to folks who had baked half a dozen of his constituents. Even if he doesn't get a stay. That mouse be shit in that box until October. Maybe even Thanksgiving, Toot argued, but Brutal could see he was weakening. Who's going to buy a cigar box some mouse had been using for a toilet? Oh, geez Louise, Brutal said. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard you say. Toot, I mean it takes the cake. First, De La Croix will keep the box clean enough to eat a church dinner out of, the way he loves that mouse. He'd lick it clean if that's what it took. Easy on that stuff, Toot said, wrinkling his nose. Second, Brutal went on, mouse shit is no big deal anyway. It's just hard little pellets. It looks like bird shot. Shake it right out. Nothing to it. Old Toot knew better than to carry his protest any further. He had been in the yard long enough to understand that he could afford to face the breeze. And when he'd do better to bend in a hurricane. This wasn't exactly a hurricane, but we blue suits liked the mouse. And when they liked the idea of De La Croix having the mouse, that meant it was at least a gale. So De La Croix got his box, and Percy was as good as his word. 2 days later, the bottom was lined with soft pads of cotton, batting from the dispensary. Percy handed them over himself, and I could see the fear in De La Croix's eyes as he reached out through the bars to take them. He was afraid Percy would grab his hand and break his fingers. I was a little afraid of this too, but no such thing happened. That was when the closest I ever came to liking Percy. But even then it was hard to mistake the look of cool amusement in his eyes. De La Croix had a pet. Percy had one too. De La Croix would keep his, petting and loving as long as he could, and Percy would wait patiently as a man like him could anyway, and burn his alive. Mousy Hilton, open for business, Harry said. The only question is, will the little bugger use it? The question was answered as soon as De La Croix caught Mr. Jingles up in one hand and lowered him gently into the box. The mouse snuggled into the white cotton as if it was Aunt Bee's comforter, and this was his home until one. Well, I'll get to the end of Mr. Jingles' story in good time. Old Toot Toot's worries that the cigar box would be full of mouse shit proved to be entirely groundless. I never saw a single turd in there, and De La Croix said he never did either, anywhere in his cell for that matter. Much later, around the time that Brutal showed me the hole in the beam, we found colored splinters. I moved a chair out of the restraint corner room and found a little pile of mouse turds back there. He'd always gotten back to the same place to do his business, seemingly as far from us as he could get. Here's another thing. I never saw him peeing, and usually mice can hardly turn the faucet off for 2 minutes at a time, especially while they're eating. I told you the damn thing had to be one of God's mysteries. A week or so after Mr. Jingles had settled down in the cigar box, De La Croix called me and Brutal down to his cell to see something. He said it so much that it was annoying. If Mr. Jingles had so much rolled over on his back with his paws in the air, it was the cutest thing on God's earth, as far as a half-pint Cajun was concerned. But this time, what he was up to really was sort of amusing. Delacroix had pretty much forgotten by the world following his conviction, but he had one relation, an old maiden aunt, I believe, who wrote him once a week. She had sent him an enormous bag of peppermint candies, the sort which are marketed underneath the name Canada Mints these days. They look like big pink pills. Delacroix was not allowed to have the whole bag at once. Naturally, it was a 5-pounder. He would have gobbled them until he had to go to the infirmary with stomach gripes. Like almost every murderer we had ever had on the mile, he had absolutely no understanding of moderation. We'd give them out to him half a dozen at a time, and only if he remembered to ask. Mr. Jingles was sitting beside Delacroix on the bunk when we got down there, holding one of those pink candies in his paws and munching contentedly away at it. Delacroix was simply overcome with delight. He was like a classical pianist watching his 5-year-old son play his first halting exercises. But don't get me wrong, it was funny, a real hoot. The candy was half the size of Mr. Jingles, and his white furred belly already distended from it. "Take it away from him, Eddie," Brutal said, half laughing and half horrified. "Jesus almighty Christ, he'll eat until he busts. And can I smell peppermint from here? How many of you let him have?" "This is his second," Delacroix said, looking a little nervously at Mr. Jingles' belly. "You really think, you know, bust his guts?" "Might," Brutal said. That was enough authority for Delacroix. He reached for the half-beaten pink mint. I expected the mouse to nip him, but Mr. Jingles gave it over the mint, what remained of it anyway, as meek as could be. I looked at Brutal, and Brutal gave his head a little shake as if to say no. He didn't understand it either. Then Mr. Jingles plopped down into his box and lay there at the side in an exhausted way that made all three of us laugh. After that, we got used to seeing the mouse sitting beside Delacroix, holding a mint and munching away on it just as neatly as an old lady at an afternoon tea party. Both of them surrounded by what I later smelled in that hole in the beam, a half-bitter, half-sweet cell of peppermint candy. There's one more thing to tell you about Mr. Jingles before moving on to the arrival of William Wharton, which was when the cyclone really touched down in C-Block. A week or so after the incident of peppermint candies, around the time when we'd pretty much decided Delacroix wasn't going to feed his pet to death, in other words, the Frenchman called me down to his cell. I was on my own for some time being. Brutal over at the commissary for something was, according to the regs, was not supposed to approach a prisoner in such circumstances. But since I had come, I probably could have shot-putted Delacroix 20 yards one-handed on a good day. I decided to break the rule and see what he wanted. "Watch this, Botch," I'd come. "You gotta see what Mr. Jingles can do." He reached behind the cigar box and brought up a small wooden spool. "Where'd you get that?" I asked, although I suppose I knew. There's only really one person who could have gotten it from. "Old Toot Toot," he said. "Watch this." I was already watching. I could see Mr. Jingles in his box, standing up with his small front paws propped on the edge, his black eyes fixed on the spool Delacroix was holding between his thumb and first finger in his right hand. It felt a little funny chill go up my back. I had never seen a mere mouse attend to something with such sharpness, with such intelligence. I don't believe Mr. Jingles was a supernatural visitation, and if I had given you that idea, I'm sorry, but I'd never doubted that he was a genius of his kind. Delacroix bent over and rolled the threadless spool across the floor of his cell. It went easy like a pair of wheels connected by an axle. The mouse was out of his box in a flash, and across the floor after it like a dog chasing after a stick. I exclaimed in surprise, and Delacroix grinned. The spool hit the wall and rebounded. Mr. Jingles went around it and pushed it back to the bunk, switching from one end of the spool to the other whenever it looked like it was going to veer off course. He pushed the spool until it hit Delacroix's foot. Then he looked back up at him for a moment as to make sure Delacroix had no immediate task for him. A few arithmetic problems to solve, perhaps, and some Latin to praise. Apparently satisfied on his score, Mr. Jingles went back to the cigar box and settled down on it again. "You taught him that," I said. "Yes, sir, Boss Edgecombe," Delacroix said. His little smile was only slightly dissembling. "He fetched it every time. Smart as hell, ain't he?" "And the spool? How do you know to fetch that for him, Eddie?" "He whispered in my ear that he wanted," Delacroix said serenely, "same as he whispered his name." Delacroix showed all the other guys his mouse's trick, all except Percy. To Delacroix, it didn't matter that Percy had suggested the cigar box and procured the cotton which to line it. Delacroix was like some dogs. Kick them once and they never trust you again, no matter how nice you are to them. I can hear Delacroix now yelling, "Hey, you guys, come and see what Mr. Jingles can do." And then going down a blue suit cluster, Brutal, Harry, Dean, even Bill Dodge. All of them had been properly amazed too, the same as I had been. 3 or 4 days after Mr. Jingles started doing the trick with the spool, Harry Terwilliger rummaged through the arts and crafts stuff we kept in the restraint room, found the Crayolas, and brought them to Delacroix with a smile that was almost embarrassed. "I thought you'd might like to make that spool different colors," he said. "Then your little pal will be like a circus mouse or something." "A circus mouse," Delacroix said, looking completely rapturously happy. I suppose he was completely happy, maybe for the first time in his whole miserable life. That's just what he is too. A circus mouse. "When I get out of here, he's gonna make me rich, like in a circus. You see if he don't." Percy Wetmore would no doubt have pointed out that Delacroix, when he left Cold Mountain, he'd be riding in an ambulance that didn't need to run its light or siren. But Harry knew better. He has told Delacroix to make a spool as colorful as he could as quick as he could, because he'd have to take the crayons back after dinner. Del made it colorful all right. When he was done, one end of the spool was yellow, the other end was green, the drum in the middle was firehouse red. We got used to hearing Delacroix trumpet. "Mes tantes, monsieur et madame, les cirques présentement, les mousses amazantes." That wasn't exactly it, but it gives you an idea of stew-pot French of his. Then he'd make this sound way down his throat. I think it was supposed to represent a drum roll, and fling the spool. Mr. Jingles would be after it in a flash, either nosing it back or rolling it with his paws. The second ray really was something you'd have to pay to see in a circus, I think. Delacroix and his mouse, and the mouse's brightly colored spool, were our chief amusements at the time that John Coffey came into our care and custody, and that was the way things remained for a while. Then my urinary affection, which had lain still for a while, came back, and William Warden arrived, and all hell broke loose.